Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Nadia. On the programme this week, we are delighted to be joined by Greenock and Inverclyde MSP, Stuart McMillan. Good afternoon, Stuart, and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon,
and also,
thank you.
We are delighted to welcome Hugh Marshall from Talking Wales. Good afternoon, Hugh, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
To start, we will begin with the Middle East update. At least 60,430 Palestinians have been killed and 148,722 wounded in Gaza since 7th of October 2023. After Sir Keir Starmer said he might recognize the state of Palestine unless Israel allows more aid into Gaza. Donald Trump's envoy visited Gaza and reported nothing to see here, despite daily reports of Palestinians being shot queuing for food. Now, an action on armed violence report has found Israel closes 88% of cases of alleged war crimes or abuse without charges. You? Shall we discuss? We can have 1 minute each for this particular topic, yeah? Thank you.
Yeah, it just seems to be getting worse. I saw some footage yesterday of planes flying over and people saying that the food isn't landing anywhere near them, or what is being sort of dropped in there isn't enough. And it looks like Ben Gavir is making sort of basically making statements that he wants the Palestinians erased, and I just don't understand how people who had a genocide conducted towards them are doing the same to another group of people. It's just, I don't know, it's just beyond comprehension. Witkoff was there, obviously, saying, having talks, but it looks like now Netanyahu isn't listening. He has to continue the war in order to keep himself in power and to keep himself out of the courts. So, it's good that the world is actually now starting to, sort of turn on Netanyahu and his government. But, something needs to happen quickly.
Thank you, Hugh. And Stuart, would you like to add?
I don't disagree at all with you. I mean, what we see on a daily basis is just horrific. The way that people are being killed and losing their lives. And this politics of starvation is just grotesque in every aspect. I did see something on social media this morning about the demonstration that took place in Sydney, the length of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Absolutely crammed full of people supporting Palestine and also wanting an end to the barbarity that's taking place now. I think the more that the public put pressure upon the politicians, the better, because Netanyahu has his own agenda, and we all know that. You quite rightly indicated an aspect of it there anyway, but the more pressure that is put upon the politicians across the globe, particularly the Western world, the better, because Netanyahu needs to listen, because this daily carnage and this daily death toll increasing the way it is just abhorrent.
Yeah, thank you both of you. I totally agree with that. And Rishi, we will get on to the Ukraine update. Russia launched a missile attack on Kiev early on Sunday, the military administration of the Ukrainian capital said. Witness reported a loud blast shaking the city soon after midnight. The reported attack comes days after Russia's first airstrike of the year on Kiev, which killed at least 31 people, including 5 children, and wounded more than 150. On Saturday, Ukraine said it hit military targets and a gas pipeline in drone attacks in Russia. Ukraine's SBU security service said the strikes carried out on Friday night by long-distance drones hit a military airfield in the southwestern town of Primorsko-Akhtarsk. They caused a fire in an area where Iranian-built Shahed drones relied on by Russia to attack Ukraine, West told, the SBU said. The Russia's defense ministry said air defense systems had destroyed 112 Ukrainian drones over Russian territory, 34 over the Rostov region in a nearly 9-hour period from Friday night to Saturday morning. More than 120 firefighters were trying to extinguish a blaze at an oil depot in Russian city of Sochi that was sparked by Ukrainian drone attack, a regional governor said early on Sunday. Indian oil refineries will continue to buy oil from Russia, officials have said, before threatened US sanctions next week against Moscow's trading partners over the war in Ukraine. A fire that broke out near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after Ukrainian shelling has been brought under the control. The Russian-installed administration of the plant in the Ukraine said on Saturday. Ukrainian authorities said on Saturday that they had arrested several politicians in connection with a large-scale corruption scheme in the defense sector shortly after an uproar over the independence of anti-graft bodies. A law passed in the July stripped the National Anti-Corruption Agency and Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutors Office of their independence and placed them under the supervision of Prosecutor General, himself appointed by the head of state. On Thursday, President Vladimir Zelensky restored the body's independence after an outcry from the country's allies and first anti-government street demonstration since Russia's invasion. On Saturday, NABU said it and the SAP exposed a scheme of the systematic misappropriation of budget funds allocated by local authorities for the needs of the defense forces, as well as the receipt and the provision of the unlawful benefits on the especially large scale. Zelensky said in a statement, I'm grateful to the anti-corruption agencies for their work. It is important that anti-corruption institutions operate independently, and the law passed on Thursday guarantees them all the tools necessary for a real fight against corruption. Hugh and Stuart, can we discuss 1 or 2 minutes on this particular topic?
Okay, thank you. So President Trump, when he was re-elected last year, he did indicate, he's indicated many things clearly, but one of them was that he would get the war finished in a week, I think, from memory. Now, this has been on. We are far too. This has been on for far too long. The new sanctions that are going to come in next week might have hopefully might have an impact upon the Russian president and also the Russian economy. But there needs to be even more pressure placed upon President Putin and also Russia to stop what they are doing. Now, this I've spoken about this obviously in the show before. This situation is seriously harming the continent of Europe, and now that certainly helps Putin and his agenda. So it's really, in my opinion, it's really important that the EU themselves can actually try to get back onto a unified position with regards to Russia. Now that is difficult, I accept, but I think that would be hugely important also about trying to get even more pressure placed upon Russia, because the thing that Putin will understand is about his economy and how it's adversely affecting his economy. So more needs to be done with regards to sanctions to have an even more biting aspect to what's actually coming from Russia.
Thank you, Stuart. Hugh?
Yeah, I agree with Stuart. I think it was interesting that, Trump, who obviously promised to end this war within 24 hours, his influence over Putin is non-existent. But it was interesting to see that the sanctions that they brought in against secondary countries. So I think India now have switched from taking Russian oil. Ironically, they're now getting oil from the United States. So Trump, the US seems to be profiting from that element. But yeah, as you say, economically is the only way you can sort of hit them. I think what this has shown in general, though, is that Russia isn't the military superpower that we all thought they were. The fact that Ukraine have repelled them for such a time, has weakened Putin's hand on the global stage. Yes, they have tactical nuclear weapons, but I don't think even Putin is mad enough to use those because he values his own life beyond anything else. So yeah, it is difficult. The timescales are being, the goalposts being moved. It was 50 days, and I think Trump has said he's reducing the number of days. And I suppose the fact that, ironically, things like the Epstein files are drawing so much attention, then Trump is looking for things to deflect attention away from them. So potentially he will take more action against Russia. What was disturbing was the fact that he's sending potentially two nuclear submarines. We're not sure whether they're nuclear powered or whether they're carrying nuclear weapons. So yeah, it's that's a worrying potential escalation.
Thank you. Stuart, would you like to add anything on that particular, the deflecting theme of, attention by Trump?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. The pressure that President Trump is coming under in the US clearly is growing by the day and the week. And one of the articles I read last week was some of the absolute MAGA support that he had. Some of them actually now turning on him. I think it's around about 10% was the figure that was reported. So he clearly does need to look for some successes and some wins on a global scale. Now, bearing in mind, his whole agenda was America first, and he didn't really want to play that much of a role on the international stage. Whether he likes it or not, he's been dragged into that. And if he can do something with regards to the war, the illegal war from Russia towards Ukraine, then he probably will then get some kudos. Now that'll be quite strange, I'm sure, for most of us to actually want to understand or accept. But this war, this illegal war, it's caused so much damage, and the rebuilding program, we will not be able to comprehend that, quite frankly.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next topic. Is social media the right place for nuclear armed states to brag about nuclear threat capabilities? Hugh?
It's bonkers, isn't it? The fact that you've got the leader of the free world, potentially, the most powerful person in the world, is conducting his whole affairs via his own social media platform. I don't know. It's just mad. So yeah, as I say, it's just deeply disturbing.
Thank you, Hugh. Stuart?
Yes, it is, but I'm not surprised. If just looking back in history, whether also social media clearly wasn't around in the past, but there will have been threats utilised, whether it's through the written media or in the broadcasting media in the past, where the potential threat will have been spoken about by some world leaders and also their acolytes. So I'm not surprised that social media is being used in this regard. I agree with you. In fact, it's coming from President Trump's.
Is this just hot air, or should we worry about hotheads acting with the nuclear codes? Stuart?
No, I don't think it is just hot air. I think there's an element of that. But let's face it, I don't think any of us, certainly in this programme today, or certainly many of my constituents that I know, would actually have wanted to have people like President Trump, President Putin, Netanyahu with the codes for nuclear weapons. So I think there's a real threat, but I do think there's a lot of hot air, but we cannot discount the fact that this is a threat.
Bragging about nuclear threats online isn't just irresponsible, and it is very dangerous. Don't you think so, Hugh? And do you think it is just political posturing, or this is a real risk?
I think there's an element there, but I think the other thing we need to remember about social media is how it amplifies other stories. And because Trump is, a reactionary, he hates bad press. We saw with the Labour figures coming out last week, that they were bad. So what does he do? Sack the person who was compiling the numbers. So anything negative, he reacts against very badly. And it's the fact, because of social media, is why the Epstein files have really sort of harmed him. And it's, I think it was, we're talking about sort of the MAGA element, of being almost half the United States. Apparently 85% of all Americans, including, sort of MAGA and Democrats, want the whole of the Epstein files released. So I think the fact that so much is playing out on social media, and the fact that Trump, uses it, you see, Medvedev and Putin, they make less use of that because obviously they use state media to speak to Russian people. But in the US and the West, it is a powerful tool. But it does appear as though that Trump's following is starting to crumble. His economic plans appear to be stalling and causing harm to people in the United States. So again, because of social media, that could actually accelerate his decline in popularity and support, and potentially those who are associated with him. And I think we need to make more of the connection between Farage and Reform and the MAGA oil barons who seem to be funding a lot of this activity.
So when this personal egos replace the diplomacy, and it has been said in the social media, and in terms of the nuclear, when we speak about this nuclear context, don't you think like the misinformations will be spread in social media? Do you think it is really dangerous?
Misinformation. We had this year. We had last week. We had the 1-year anniversary of the Southport murders. The sad case there where 3 young girls lost their lives, and the reports, and the research, and I've been looking into that as part of my master's studies in journalism, and it shows that misinformation caused a lot of the issues there. I don't use X personally anymore. I pop in there every now and again to have a look at things, and it's just a stream of right-wing nonsense, that is aimed to cause division and put fear into people. And I think that's what Trump has done. He's uses social media to scare people, and to amplify his messages. And remember, Trump lies, on every minute of every day. Almost everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie. So just the fact that you've got somebody in such position of power that has his own social media platform that he uses to speak to an audience who adore him. Is it's going back a couple of years, you would never have thought this would be possible, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s and remember the United Nations being a powerful force for peace and diplomacy. It's just gone out the window, and as you can see now that that Trump's sort of tough guy diplomacy, it just doesn't work. He said, but again, he just tries to lay the blame on, everything is Joe Biden's fault. That he's saying that he's stopped 6 wars in the last few months, which is nonsense. Even India and Pakistan, said that it wasn't anything to do with him. It's just terrifying. And as I say, social media, it's a very powerful tool, and it's very, it has its place, and it's, used well, it can inform, but as you say, it can also disinform, and that's the issue that we're facing today.
Thank you. Stuart?
Yeah, it's social media. I, as my staff will tell you, I have a lot of skepticism about social media, but I recognise that it is an important tool, and it's a tool that has to be harnessed. But I think we all recognise that it's a lot easier to put out the propaganda and the misinformation by bad actors. And sadly, with the increase in social media use and very different platforms, and that's all the easier to get even more misinformation out to the wider public. And quite honestly, I don't think that no matter which party or parties are going to be in government, whether it's UK or elsewhere, it's difficult to manage that and difficult to put proper restrictions on it, because that also then has a negative effect in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of expression.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next topic. In a speech on Thursday to mark the start of Edinburgh festivals, First Minister John Sweeney set out the importance of culture and Scottish Government's commitment to supporting Scotland's creative industries. We may recognise the direct impact of culture to our economy, but do we get the indirect impact which makes Scotland a better place to live? Stuart?
I think we do, but we could always get more, understandably. So I'm saying that as I'm a piper, and in the past I studied in Europe. I studied in France, Germany, and in Sweden. And also, anytime I studied abroad, I took the pipes with me, and I did quite a bit of piping when I was there. Also, I did a couple of interrail trips around Europe, pipes, kilt, and away I went. And it managed to open doors. It's a very kind of soft part of engaging about Scottish culture elsewhere. Now, for me, Scotland's cultural offering, whether it's culture from Scotland or culture that's coming into the country, is hugely important. And the fact that we've actually got such a global success story in Edinburgh that happens every single August is just magnificent, quite honestly. It obviously brings a lot of people in. It brings a lot of diversity into the country, and it also helps to stimulate a lot of dialogue and discussion. That every single year there will be something that has been controversial, and obviously we know that already in terms of some of the media reports that we've read over the course of the last week. But at the same time, having such a global festival on our doorstep is just magnificent. Now, the cultural element, the bit that I would kind of challenge on is that Edinburgh clearly is the home of these festivals. I would like to see more actually being dispersed throughout all of Scotland, to more within the towns and villages, in contrast to just Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Dundee being the main places where a lot of the cultural offering will be. So I think there is more that can be done in that regard, because that actually helps to stimulate even more of a cultural offering across the wider country as compared to just some of the main cities.
Thank you. You?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I've been to Edinburgh a few times to see shows. I think one of the issues now, sadly, is just the cost of it and the accommodation. I think that one of the negatives of the success of the Fringe is that and with the sort of the emergence of Airbnb, is that a lot of artists now find it difficult to go there to perform because of the accommodation costs. But yeah, culture is really important. This week we're kicking off. Yesterday it started the National Eisteddfod. So the Eisteddfod, is a long-running cultural event in Wales. It's one of the biggest cultural events in Wales, where people go to compete in across a range of competitions, singing, dancing, music. No piping, unfortunately, but maybe we can ask them to introduce that at some point. But yeah, the interesting thing with the National Eisteddfod is that it travels every year, so it goes from north to south. So last year it was in Pontypridd in the South Wales Valleys. This year it's up in Wrexham, my hometown. So I'll be going up this week. But that is the important part, is taking culture to different parts of Wales. And because it's a Welsh language festival, places like Wrexham, where I'm from, where the Welsh language isn't, sort of historically isn't strong, it is important. But I think in Wales we see from the spend on culture, I think it's the lowest of all the four nations in the UK, and there is a lot of concern. And I think one of the things that people look at when we look at austerity and making cuts, it's always things like the arts that get sort of cut first. And I think there is this impression that the arts aren't important. But I worked with several organisations who worked in some of the most impoverished communities in the South Wales Valleys. And they say the biggest impact they've seen in their communities is the closure of, community centres that were hubs for cultural activities. So I think, it's very short-sighted to think that culture is something for an elite, for a social elite. But yeah, it's vital, and it's also, it's any sort of nation. The culture is an integral part of it. And as Stuart was saying, there are many things in Scotland that you associate with music, pipes in particular, but it's such an important part of our national identity. So it needs investing in, and it is an investment because you get a return on it.
Yeah, the economic benefit is really high. And also, one thing which I would like to touch upon is the community cohesion and, the Fringe festivals and the Edinburgh festivals influence in well-being and identity and community cohesion in Scotland. Stuart?
Yes, I believe it does. But I'll go back to a point that Hugh just spoke about there, and
Yeah.
that was obviously cost. And Hugh's absolutely right. I mean, it's not just a new thing. This has been coming year after year with the increased level of costs basically for artists to come and stay in Edinburgh. I think the one positive thing I would say though is it's actually not diminished the offer that is in Edinburgh. There is a huge economic benefit for Edinburgh, and also just certainly for the Central Belt and the Main, because there are folk who will come and they'll stay outside of Edinburgh. They'll get accommodation there and then travel in and out for their shows. So I think there is a very much it's a success story, notwithstanding the local challenges that are there. On the community cohesion point, certainly across the country, I know I will look at the Greenock and Inverclyde constituency in this example. There's an organisation called Rig Arts. It's a third sector organisation, and the amount of work that they undertake with different parts of the community, and people, but certainly undertaking some projects as well with some of the new Scots who have came in, is hugely important, and that does help with the community cohesion in terms of bringing people together. So culture has got It's got a huge part to play. It already does. And I think more investment that could go into that, that certainly will increase that level of community cohesion. Can I just touch on one other point, just in terms of culture? I in the past, I've got quite frustrated from some who try and castigate Scotland when it comes to its cultural offer. I said, oh, it's only kilts and bagpipes and things. It's not. Now, you wouldn't consider saying to folk in London, well, actually, stop highlighting about Big Ben and the Red London Bus and Tower Bridge, because these are things that people actually want to see when they're a tourist and when they go into London to go and visit. So they are the initial hook that helps to get people in, and then people then explore and then do other things. In Scotland's sense, it's the exact same in terms of whether it's kilts, whether it's bagpipes, whether it's haggis, whether it's other aspects of our music, whether it's castles, whether it's lochs. There are so many aspects that Scotland has got, but we need to use these hooks. It then gets people in, then gets people engaged, and they then learn a lot more about Scotland's cultural and tourism offer. I do get a bit frustrated about that, the Scottish cringe in terms of some of our traditional elements of culture, but our cultural offering is so much more. But sometimes you need to have some of the hooks to get people in and then get them interested and involved.
Yeah, the economic benefit of the Edinburgh Festival, like, we did not go in deep as to it, like, the indirect and the direct ways, you have mentioned about the people, those who are coming here and staying and spending money here, and there are indirect ways of economic benefits as well, if you can touch upon that.
Well, indirectly, it's I mean, you'll have people who are coming here, they're going to be working, they're going to be contributing to Scotland whilst they're here. And you will also have, I mean, that's not just the artists, but certainly the folk behind the artists who are actually who are there to help put the show on. So that's a great opportunity. So people come, they engage, they learn, they meet people from many other countries in the world. So in effect, Edinburgh becomes a global melting pot over the festival period. And that doesn't just dissipate when the festival ends. It's there on an annual basis, and that has got a huge positive impact for all of Scotland as well. So the fact that people want to come from all over the world, not just to perform, but also to go to shows and invest their time and their hard-earned money certainly in the Edinburgh economy, but also kind of Edinburgh and Central Belt economies, then they might not just stay in Edinburgh. A lot will actually use Edinburgh as a base and then go and travel around. So there is the direct impact in terms of the festivals, but also the indirect, because people will go and see other aspects and other parts of the country, and that also is very beneficial.
Thank you. At this year's Edinburgh Fringe, there are many plays dealing with democracy and free speech, including Within Theatres, Julia, 1984, on at Summer Hall. A video will be played by our program producer, Kevin Watson. Kevin, can you please play the video?
Hi, my name is Sofia Borisevich, and I'm the founder of Within Theatre, a team of Slavic performers based in London. And together with the team, we focus on exposing violence in its all forms. And also, we're standing together for freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And this is our second year at the Fringe. We are bringing Julia 1984 to Summer Hall Main Hall from 31st of July to 11th of August. And this is a new writing piece written by Karina Widman.
My name is Karina Widman, and I'm the writer of Julia after 1984. It's a real privilege to be here today and tell this story. Within Theatre Company approached me 6 months ago to write this political and important story for stage.
For us, this play is about following the story of the female character from George Orwell 1984, Julia, and seeing what happened to her after she's been released from the thought police. This is a story of violence, a story of strength, a story of truth and what it means to be truthful and honest in the world that is being corrupted, that is being watched by the big brother, and what it's like to live under totalitarian regime, something that my actors and people from my company know really well, unfortunately.
My name is Tanya Polosina. I directed Julia 1984. This is my debut on the stage. I'd like to say few thoughts about our play. Lie and fear have no zip codes. They are the main tools to rob off our freedom and love. Lie and fear change us from inside. It's not just history, it is happening in the many places right now. To speak about here is a privilege for us, and we do it by exposing the evil of violence in all its forms. Thank you.
At the time when we first had our conversations with Sofia Beresevich, who's the producer and also the main actress of the show, that the most important way and to do the justice to the text that Orwell wrote at the time was to write the sequel from a feminist perspective that would address the issues today. And as our director, Tanya Polosina, mentions at the end of the show, that political is always personal. And I think that that was the main question that we had in mind. And I hope that we did manage to do justice to Orwell, but also to our generations today. Thank you.
We're really grateful for performing here at Summer Hall for our second year and for having a platform to speak out and to, to be together on stage, united, and to see theatre as a platform to speak and to expose the truth. So yeah, we thank you so much for coming, and we hope you can catch the show.
While oppressive governments around the world lock up opposition politicians and journalists, is there more than a little irony hearing when the far right in the UK and US cry freedom of speech? Hugh?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I think again the arts is a part of its other contribution is that it does create discussion and debate around some complicated positions. But yeah, freedom of speech. I'm an advocate of free speech, but I think a lot of the people who support free speech don't see the difference between free speech and hate speech, and that is the problem. People think that it just gives them permission to say whatever they want. We've seen, with going back to the Southport disturbances, somebody being jailed for posting things on social media. We've had Reform and the Conservatives, saying that somebody saying something on social media, but you can't sort of say that you want free speech but not realise when you're overstepping the mark. So it is a difficult one, and again I think social media is blurring the lines. People see things being posted from accounts, many of them are from abroad, so they don't sort of come under sort of our jurisdiction, but also the fact that social media platforms do so little to stop that. It's quite interesting. Somebody on X asked Grok, the AI assistant, if sort of right-wing and extreme and racist comments had increased on X, and the answer it gave was yes, it has, because specifically since Musk took over, because obviously he allowed people who had been banned by the previous sort of people to come back onto the platform, citing free speech. He also, the algorithm then, because there's so much hate out there, then the hate sort of feeds hate, and the fact that he gutted the system to sort of monitor and ensure that hate speech wasn't there. So by going to the extremes of free speech is actually causing more division and more problems. So yeah, it's a hard one. but like I say, I think the arts is an important space for that. And when people start policing things like the arts for what people can say or cannot say, it does it does cause challenges.
Stuart?
Yeah, I agree with Hugh, actually. I mean, Hugh's comments about the difference between free speech and hate speech, it chimes very much with certainly some of my own considerations in this issue. I mean, over the years, man, I've said to folk, I mean, I genuinely believe that people should have the ability to have free speech. Absolutely. I've got no qualms about that. But if people want the right to do that, with rights also come responsibilities. And that's where, for me, that's where there is the challenge with regards to crossing over into hate speech. So, I mean, the arts are a platform for people to express different thoughts, views, opinions, whether we agree with them or not. And that's important. Because I would hate to get into a situation where the arts are just being policed, that you can only think the same as everybody else. And that clearly would mean that we have failed as politicians, but also as a society. So I think that element, that freedom of expression and of speech within the arts, for me, is hugely important. But there is that point of, at what point does it cross over into hate speech? And comments that are kind of based upon that. So there is no easy answer here. There is no easy way of actually dealing with it. But at the same time, it's yeah. And I also accept that I'm a politician, and venturing into this discussion it can be quite dangerous for any politician to do it, because it's quite easy for that to then be accused of, well, you're maybe kind of taking it too far, and it's, for me, it's not. I just think, as somebody who's involved in part of Scottish culture as a piper, I absolutely appreciate how important the arts actually are for the country and also for society. And I think the more we can do to promote that and push it, the better. But I also appreciate it is difficult when it comes to that element of freedom of expression. There was a point that was raised in the film regarding all politics is personal, and it very much is. So I think in terms of the show, I would like to try and get through to the show, but I know what my diary's like for the next couple of weeks. But I think that's a hugely important point, because all politics is local, and someone's viewpoint, someone's political viewpoint, it can be very different from their next door neighbour, or from a family friend, or from a family member. So I think we also have to recognise that, and this is where I think this show will be. I think we're hugely important, and as I say, I would love to actually get a chance to go and see it, but I'm conscious of what my diary is like.
Thank you, Stuart. And about all politics is local, we will come to that point soon. But Hugh, in a society where power is increasingly weaponized through media, language, and even the law, what role do theatre and the arts have in challenging that, in holding a mirror up to those in control, where Stuart has mentioned, and the theatre and the artist's role in freedom of speech?
Yeah, I think it's wider than that, because obviously, the best theatre, TV, film, any performance is something that informs and educates an audience. I know, because one of the shows that's getting a lot of attention at the festival this year is Brian Cox, his the portrayal of the banking collapse, because obviously a lot of that was actually focused in Scotland. So it's important that stories are told in ways that people find relatable. I think one of the big issues is people's accessibility to theatre and the arts, and people think that because it's good that schools are able to take children to theatre, because some of those come from households that just the cost of going to the theatre is too much. So I think it's having that access to it, but also that support for companies who do create sort of provocative content, because a lot of that content is not potentially going to be hugely commercial. You can put on a musical in the West End, bums on seats, and it makes a lot of money. But if you're doing a show about I don't know, sort of political riots in South Wales in the 1920s, you're not as likely to get a big audience for it. So again, that's why the sort of the subsidising of the art is important, because unless we support those organisations and groups and writers and performers, then just the world and communities are missing out. But I think the point Stuart was making about politics being personal and also being local, I think that's important as well. Is we're fortunate here in Wales. We've had quite a few performances. Obviously Michael Sheen did a huge sort of free show in Port Talbot on the Street of the Passion. Looking at the crucifixion. So it can be very, very powerful. And, you see people saying you're an art company and they're doing a piece of theatre in a bus shelter and thinking, what a load of nonsense. The reality is, by taking theatre to people, into communities, it reaches people. And, and if that sparks something in one individual, then surely it has a worth.
Thank you. You both have touched on that point. Politics is local. We will go to the next topic on that. Scottish independence. Can the Yes movement convince a majority of Scots to vote for Scottish independence if it is disunited? Does it focus too much on process and not on winning the argument? I'll go to Hugh first, and then I'll go to Stuart.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, having the viewpoint from Wales is, that there are parallels. Support for independence in Wales is growing, and it's especially amongst younger people. It is, the majority of under 25 support independence. A big majority of over 65s oppose it. So I think that as generations change and as society changes, I think we're seeing those differences. I think in Wales and potentially in Scotland, the fact that we have elections coming up in 10 months now, I think, is going to make a big difference, because obviously the two main alternatives to reform in Scotland and Wales are both, the Plaid Cymru and the SNP, the two nationalist parties who have independence as their central policy plank. And so I think, yes, I think it's going to be interesting. Discussions are there. I think it's the same in any sort of political organisation, but especially when you're looking at things like independence. We see it in Wales. You get people from across the political spectrum, from the far right to the far left, who some support independence. So it's very difficult to get people under one big tent because of the difference is there. But I think the fact that Westminster isn't working for Wales or Scotland, that's becoming clearer now. Labour support in Wales has collapsed, and I don't know what the numbers are like in Scotland, but the approval figures for Labour and Starmer are lower in Wales than they are in England. And when you think that Wales, you could have one point stuck a red rosette on a donkey and it would have won with a massive majority. Those days have gone. So I think the discussions are there. Having that broad church is a challenge, but at the end of the day, we have to just make the case that having decisions made on our behalf by 84% of the UK electorate who live in England just isn't democratic, and it just doesn't work anymore.
Thank you. Stuart?
Okay, so I think back to the 2014 referendum in this, and also prior to Yes Scotland being formed, you had the different parties, you had the different viewpoints, and everyone managed to get to a point of Yes Scotland would be this this separate entity to take the issue forward. But by that point, the SNP had already won a majority in the Scottish Parliament, and we were going to be having the referendum. So for me, I think that where we are now, notwithstanding what the opinion polls are saying, because they can change, and we know they can change. I kind of look back to that 2011 election as well. Month after month after month in that final year of the SNP being a minority administration, the SNP were losing that election. And the opinion polls changed in a matter of weeks in the run-up to the election to get to the outstanding result that we managed to get in 2011. So opinion polls are one thing, but actually having that support at the ballot box on election day is even stronger. So the one thing that I do say to people is, we still need to convince people. We still need to convince people about the benefits of independence, about the opportunities of independence, about the hope of independence, and also about how we can transform Scotland. And we can do that by talking to people on the doors. We go out and engage with people. Now, the referendum didn't go the way I wanted it to go in 2014. But as an exercise in political engagement, I have never taken part in anything like that. That was my first time in my life, and it was fabulous. It was a wonderful experience of talking to people day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, about that opportunity. Now, sadly, the population voted the way they did, excuse me, and we don't have an independent Scotland yet. Over that 11-year period, there's an estimated 1 million people who didn't vote in that election because they weren't entitled to, because they were young. Go back to Hugh's point about Wales and under 25s. So I know that younger people in Scotland want Scotland to become independent, and this is obviously kind of one of the elements why the Westminster establishment have consistently said what they've said. But next year's election is absolutely critical. But how do we get over that line? We need to talk to people. We need to get out in the communities, in the streets, on the doors, engaging with people, so that we can get that an SNP victory to get us over that line. Now, there'll be some who might still not want to agree with that, and that's fine. But the argument about process is one thing, but I would suggest that the process bit is mute if the SNP don't win the election next year. Now, that might not be welcomed by some, but the SNP is the largest party campaigning for independence, and the political election next year will be different compared to what we've had before, because Reform are now at the table. They've now got they will have candidates in the election next year, and they weren't around before. And whether we like it or not, there is a growing number of people who support that party. That will have an impact in terms of the election next year. Now, they're not going to win. I think we know that. But they will, as things stand, they are going to have people elected to the Scottish Parliament. So for me, that actually strengthens the argument that in terms of if you want independence, if you want Scotland to become an independent nation, then we need to win the election, and the SNP needs to get that majority.
And also, my next question was, like, you have touched upon that, but like my question is, what does the independence movement and the SNP specifically need to do differently to secure that crucial 50% plus one vote needed to win that. I know there is no referendum, but the First Minister has mentioned there about 50 plus 1%. Do you think only, through a campaign, door-to-door campaign, will win that 50 plus 1, or is there anything different can be done?
Door-to-door campaigning is absolutely crucial in every single election, because you will meet people who will also agree with you and some who will disagree with you. But you can have the chance to have a respectful dialogue. I enjoy canvassing. I enjoy going and knocking on doors. I'd much prefer doing that as compared to some other activities in campaign time. Even before I was elected, I enjoyed canvassing. So I know that's not popular in many kind of political circles also, because many activists don't like doing that. But I do, because I also recognise how important it is to talk to people. And if you're talking to people on their doorstep, then first of all, they're more relaxed because it's on their doorstep, and then you can then have a good discussion and dialogue if that's going to happen. Because sometimes some folk will say, "Look, I'm not interested," and fine, you don't waste their time and they don't waste yours. But having that door to door is hugely important, and the more of that, the better.
Yeah. So the old-fashioned one-to-one conversation is much better than any other form of campaign, you mean to say. And Hugh, do you have any tips for Scottish independence?
Vote for it. No, I think what Stuart was saying, was an important point. It's incredible to think that it's over 11 years now for the referendum. It feels like yesterday. But in that time, you've got a lot of younger people who've come through who are eligible to vote, and we've lost, a fair few people who were against it. And I think it's that motivating people. I think what was interesting with the independence referendum was the turnout. 85%. I don't recall any kind of turnout for an election. So the fact that people are obviously clearly engaged with it, and I think one of the big differences now is the same thing with the EU referendum, with Brexit. The promises made by those who were against independence and the promises made by those people who wanted to leave the EU have proven to be false. So I think that is a big difference. Is they promised these things and they never materialised. So there's a much stronger argument to be had this time round. Independence is normal, and I think just the fact that you have to get permission from Westminster, where you've got 84% of the population in England. England wouldn't ask Wales or Scotland for permission to do anything. So I think it's just making people aware of that under the current system, we're at the mercy of people in England, 84% of the total electorate, to decide who governs Wales and Scotland. And I think Wales is a bit different because we've never returned a Conservative majority. Proudly we can say that, even though we did have sadly a majority for Brexit. But yeah, and I think the threat of the reform, what we're seeing in Wales is the support for the right has remained about the same, but it's just shifted where the Tories were getting 20% and UKIP were getting 10%. It's now gone the other way, where Reform are getting 26-28% and the Tories vote has collapsed. But Plaid Cymru support has never been higher. And I think what's interesting, and then that's why I'm interested to learn about how the SNP turned it around in 2011, because when Plaid Cymru are out canvassing now and knocking on doors, the response they're getting is completely different to previous elections, because people actually see Plaid Cymru now as a viable party, leading in the polls. So I think it's momentum, and I think the job that Starmer is doing, I think he's doing an excellent. He's doing a terrible job for the UK, but he's doing an excellent job for Wales and Scotland.
Thank you, Hugh and Stuart. And on that note, independence is normal. We have to wind up today. Well, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We can only exist without your support. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if we cannot afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and thank you again to our guests, Stuart Macmillan MSP and Hugh Marshall. Thank you, Hugh, and thank you, Stuart. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.